Welcome to everybody also from my side. My name is Boris Heizmann, and as the head of the Eurobarometer data service at GESIS, I have the pleasure of presenting to you some information on the Eurobarometer. First of all, a brief outline of the presentation. I will start with a bit of background and history regarding the Eurobarometer. The Eurobarometer can look back on several decades now, so there is a lot going on there. And after that, I will present to you more detailed information on the most important types of Eurobarometer. On the one hand, the Standard and Special Eurobarometer series and the Flash Eurobarometer series. After that, I will present to you some ways in which you can get information on the Eurobarometer, how to search for data, how to look for different topics, and in general, how to stay up to date with regard to Eurobarometer releases. And I will close with a brief glimpse on the data linking possibilities that present themselves in the Eurobarometer surveys. So, regarding the background and the history of the Eurobarometer, we can start basically with the first Standard Eurobarometer report published almost 50 years ago. And this contains a nice mission statement, so to speak, that brings pretty much to the point what the Eurobarometer is supposed to achieve. So I will read this shortly. Just as a barometer can be used to measure the atmospheric pressure and thus to give a short-range weather forecast, this Eurobarometer can be used to observe and to some extent forecast public attitudes towards the most important current events connected directly or indirectly with the development of the European community and the unification of Europe. So we already see here that the scope of the Eurobarometer is relatively broad in that there are current events that can be connected directly or indirectly to Europe. And we will see in a minute what types of topics this actually entails. One interesting bit from this report is a central finding that says that the most important problem at the present time, so 1974, is inflation. And as you all know, nowadays this again is on the political agenda, so we can see nicely that there is a certain cyclicality with regards to the events that are covered also in the Eurobarometer. If we take a look at the Eurobarometer timeline, we can go back in time even further. So the first forerunner survey, so to speak, was carried out in 1962 with the Attitudes Towards Europe survey, which was conducted in the member states back then, and which also, as the title suggests, has a similar approach as the Eurobarometer has today. After that, in the beginning of the 1970s, there were several European community studies, and starting from 1974 until today, the label Eurobarometer is assigned to these studies, and we have the Standard and Special Eurobarometers, on which I will talk some more in a few minutes. The end of the 1980s saw the advent of another type of Eurobarometer series, namely the Flash Eurobarometer. And as the name already suggests, these are shorter surveys that can be deployed more quickly and that are focused on very specific topics. But history does not stop there, so we have in the next decades also repeatedly introductions of new survey series, but usually only for a limited time, so you could perhaps call them also limited editions. In the 1990s there were the Central and Eastern Eurobarometers, which expanded the geographic scope of the Eurobarometer, of course. Likewise, in the 2000s the Candidate Countries Eurobarometers were carried out, and both of these country groups are now part also of the Standard Eurobarometer. So of course many Central and Eastern European countries are now members of the EU and thus covered by the Eurobarometer, but the candidates are also always included now in the Standard Eurobarometer framework. Finally, in 2020, the European Parliament commissioned a series of COVID-19 surveys. And while these are not actually labeled Eurobarometers, the Parliament was kind enough to share these files with us so that this type of survey also is available through GESIS. Now let's take a closer look at the Standard and Special Eurobarometer. First of all, the Standard Eurobarometer, as the name already implies, has a strong focus on EU-related issues and on European integration. It is requested and coordinated by the European Commission, and the data producer is Kantar presently. And the question program in the survey is highly standardized, so there are many repeated questions and therefore also the potential to observe long trends with regard to many questions relating to European integration. The geographic scope, of course, includes the EU member states, but also the candidate countries and from time to time and presently also countries in the framework of the European Free Trade Agreement. So, for example, Norway or Iceland or Switzerland are currently also included here. And we usually have 2 surveys per year of the Standard Eurobarometer. The Special Eurobarometer, in contrast, also as the name suggests, covers a wide range of special topics, and it, so to speak, complements the Standard Eurobarometer. The different topical modules there are requested by the different Directorate Generals of the European Commission. For example, the Directorate General for Climate Action, which is responsible for climate policies, is the one responsible also for the climate change module in the Special Eurobarometer. And the European Parliament also usually routinely orders surveys, for example the yearly Parliameter surveys, and these data are also produced by Kantar. In the Special Eurobarometer, usually only the EU member states are surveyed, so the focus is currently on the EU 27, and we have about 6 of these surveys per year. And on average, I would say that the Special Eurobarometer waves each contain 3 topical modules on average, so that there are about 18 different topics in the field per year. In sum, there are about 240 Standard and Special Eurobarometers available at GESIS, and the access is free of charge. And many of these also are mirrored at the ICPSR, which historically has been mainly responsible for processing the Eurobarometer data, but for many years now this is done at GESIS. Regarding the methodology, both share basically the same methodology. So the sample is a multi-stage random probability one, with sampling points drawn systematically from administrative regional units, after stratification by individual regional unit and type of area, so city size, and the final interview sites are determined by random route procedures. And sometimes there are deviations from this approach, and for this please see the technical specifications which we add to the bilingual questionnaires for each survey. The mode usually is face-to-face CAPI, but of course COVID-19 made it necessary to adapt this in some cases so that there are additional modes, and you can also find more information on this in the technical specifications. There are about 1,000 interviews per country and 500 for very small countries, and these interviews are conducted in the national language. So language proficiency is a prerequisite for being part of the Eurobarometer sample. And the target population is EU or national citizens aged 15+, but at times there are special samples in the Eurobarometer, for example, such focused on 15 to 30 years old, so that the age bracket in some select cases is smaller. One feature of the Standard and Special Eurobarometers also is that the field phase is relatively short when compared to other cross-national data collection efforts. So the interviews are carried out within a space of about 4 weeks usually, and as we shall see later on, this can have benefits for certain types of research. And the sample is a cross-sectional sample, so each time a new sample is drawn. Now let's take a look at the topics covered in the Standard Eurobarometer. Here we also have several topical modules, and I have a couple of examples on this slide. And you can see that most of them are quite closely related to the EU's inner workings and institutions. And not all of them are in the field for each Standard Eurobarometer. So for example, media use in the EU or Europeans and the EU budget is not fielded every time, but there is a certain rotation built into the surveys. And as you can also see here in the center, we have also space to cover current developments such as the coronavirus outbreak, or more recently also the war in the Ukraine. If we look at the Special Eurobarometer and some exemplary topics, one can immediately see that the scope is much broader. So we have a couple of technological focused topics here, like cybersecurity or public attitudes towards robots. We have environmental issues like attitudes towards the environment, or more specifically climate change. And we also have a variety of social issues like discrimination in the European Union and gender-based violence. And if you compare these topics to topical modules in other cross-national surveys, you can immediately see that these are much more specific. And this, of course, also has to do with the capacity to field special topics when you have about 18 topics that you can field each year. So I will close this with one example from research which showcases some of the benefits of the Eurobarometer. This is a paper by Minkus and colleagues. They investigate whether there was a Trump effect on the EU's popularity, and they used the presidential election in the US that elected Trump into office as a national experiment. And the basic idea here is that Trump and his anti-EU stance perhaps led to a sort of rallying around the flag effect, which leads persons in the EU to have more positive views of the EU because they wish to have a stronger EU that counters basically Trump's political position. In the figure on the left-hand side, you see the relative frequency of observations per country, and the vertical red line is the election day. And here you immediately see that you have a good database for such an analysis, as we have a large number of cases right before and right after this election time. And in many other cross-national data sets, there would be many fewer lines and also many fewer cases, which also, of course, limits the perspectives that can be taken with those data. The paper has a lot of interesting findings. I just want to point out one central finding in the right-hand side figure. There you see that, yes, there is such an effect. So persons interviewed after the election have a more positive view towards the European Union. But this effect is strongest for persons identifying as politically right. And the potential explanation here is, or the observation here is, that this increase in the EU's popularity is not a liberal or cosmopolitan one. It actually mostly is a right-wing reaction, so a right-wing call for a stronger EU against President Trump. Again, it's a very interesting paper with many more findings. You will find a link to it later on in the presentation slides. Next I come to the Flash Eurobarometer. As I already mentioned, these are relatively short and they focus usually only on one specific topic, and they are relatively similar to the special Eurobarometer modules in that they are also requested by the different Directorate Generals of the European Commission and at times also by the European Parliament. On average, we have about 11 waves per year if we look at the GESIS data catalog, so there is also a very steady stream of new surveys in this framework each year. The units of analysis here are individuals or also firms, so the Flash Eurobarometer also is a valuable resource for researchers interested in attitudes of firm managers or in reports of firm behavior, basically. The sampling is done via random digit dialing in the case of telephone surveys, or via an access panel in the case of web-based surveys, and the interviews are also conducted in the national language. For the individuals, the target population also is EU or national citizens aged 15 plus. But here we also at times have samples outside of the EU. For example, there was a flash on the future of Europe, which was carried out, for example, in Brazil or China also. The samples usually also are up to 1,000 per country or 500 in the case of firms. And the field phase is actually much smaller, of course, much shorter, just 1 week usually. And these surveys also are cross-sectional, so a new sample is drawn each time. And we currently have about 500 different Flash Eurobarometer surveys at GESIS, and these are also accessible free of charge. Here we also take a look at some exemplary topics. They have a similar breadth in scope as the special Eurobarometer, so we have several types of firm Flash Eurobarometers, for example, asking small and medium enterprises about their measures for resource efficiency and green markets, or business attitudes towards corruption. We also have surveys that are focused on consumption patterns, basically, such as attitudes of Europeans towards tourism. And we also, of course, have surveys that are developed to cover very current topics, such as EU's response to the energy challenges, which was recently released, or the survey on attitudes on vaccination against COVID-19. Here also we have an example from a research, a paper by Sandu that used the just mentioned vaccination Flash Eurobarometer. And also a lot of interesting results here. I just want to show a few examples. So what we see in this figure is basically the difference between persons that are positively orientated regarding vaccination against COVID-19 versus negative orientation. And here we see that in most countries, or basically all countries, the positive outweighs the negative, but there is markable variation between the countries. So on the right hand side here you see several Eastern European countries in which the difference is not that large. We also see here that there is a rural-urban divide in many countries, so persons dwelling in urban settings are usually more inclined to be positively orientated towards vaccination against COVID-19. And this could, for example, be explained by their overall more positive vaccination orientations due to population density or higher use of public transport, which of course means a higher risk of infection in the context of COVID-19. Another finding of this paper, or another analysis carried out here, this is a cluster analysis. I won't go into too much detail here as it is very complex. But what is interesting here is that the countries are not simply differentiated by whether there are few or many persons for or against vaccination, but there are also different types and subtypes here. So there are, for example, countries that have high intentions to vaccinate soon, but in which perhaps due to a rollout of vaccinations, the already vaccinated group is much smaller. And likewise, there are controversy societies in which different configurations of anti-vaxxers are present, so there is a lot of cross-national variation apparently here, which could also stimulate further research trying to explain these differences. Okay, so that was it basically for the first part. We now switch to the Eurobarometer in the web. We have basically several approaches how you can inform yourself about Eurobarometers. The first to mention is, of course, the Eurobarometer homepage by the European Commission and the European Parliament, where you can always find information on the latest surveys, where you have the possibility to browse all surveys or browse them by category, so by topic basically. And you also have a search functionality to search for specific keywords, of course. If you choose a survey there, you will be taken to another page where you can download reports, where you can look at some result figures, and you will also find a link there into the European Open Data Portal. And this is a good place to go if you only need macro level data. So what is available here are processed data files for the Eurobarometer surveys in Excel format, which present weighted results per country, for example. This is volume A that is highlighted here. So if you only need country averages for the Eurobarometer variables and are not interested in microdata, this is a good place to go to collect the data you need in your research. If you want to work with the microdata, you will need to come to GESIS or to the ICPSR as mentioned above. And at GESIS we have a Eurobarometer microsite dedicated to all of the survey series I mentioned in the beginning. So you see here in the menu you can access all 5 of them. And let's say you are interested in the Standard and Special Eurobarometer. If you choose Study Overview in this menu, you will be taken to this site. And I think this is a good page to bookmark, because on the right hand side you always find the newest released Eurobarometer files. So if any Eurobarometer wave is not mentioned here, it always means that we have not released it yet. And on the left hand side you find a couple of interesting overview documents. Perhaps the most useful one could be the overview linking the Eurobarometer report titles and corresponding surveys, as this enables you to find out in which of the Eurobarometer waves a certain module was carried out, and you can also find out whether this module has been carried out before. So that is definitely something that can be helpful, especially if you want to accumulate several waves of Eurobarometers. We also have a bibliography which is continuously maintained by central GESIS services. So this is also done for other data collections at GESIS. And here we offer a PDF version, and but also EndNote versions and BibTeX versions for import into these citation managers. So this should also be helpful if you want to look at prior research that has been conducted with Eurobarometer data. We furthermore offer access to several trends and trend files. So what you see here in the lower part of the screenshot is a number of externally created cumulation files. The newest one is the harmonized Eurobarometer 2004 to 2021. And so you can use these data sets in order to conduct longitudinal analysis and look at trends. But we also offer several trend tables. For example, let's say you are interested in whether the membership is seen as good or bad, so membership in the EU that is. And if you select this one, you will get a table that looks like this. So you find out in which of the Eurobarometer waves this variable is present, when was that Eurobarometer wave carried out, and you also see the variable name here. So this can also be a good starting point to create your own longitudinal file. Finally, we also have the GESIS search, and this is not restricted to the Eurobarometer, so this search functionality basically covers all our data holdings. And here you also have the possibility to look for specific variables. In this example, I looked for a climate change perception scale. And you can see in the results that there are 17 variables that match this query. And the first link here also shows that it's a Eurobarometer variable with a link to the research data, so you can also quickly download the dataset if you are interested in this variable. So I come to the final point for this presentation, the data linking potentials of the Eurobarometer. Basically, there are three dimensions that you can take here, being the Eurobarometer being a comparative survey. Of course, you have the countries, so you can link country level aggregate data to the Eurobarometer. But we also have regional indicators in the Eurobarometer, which are based on the NUTS classification of the European Union. So this can also be a linking dimension here. And we have the dimension of time, namely the fact that several questions, or many questions actually, in the Eurobarometer are asked repeatedly. So in the aggregate, you can also look at developments over time. And if someone were to use all of these, you would end up basically with 4 levels of analysis, depending on which level you assign the time dimension. And this facilitates a variety of longitudinal investigations on the macro levels. For example, also fixed effects approaches using country dummies, which allow to approach the question of within country developments. Furthermore, there are linked or linkable data which are based on or including the Standard and Special Eurobarometers. For example, the Onbound project at GESIS had the substantive focus on national and religious identity, and their main objective was to aid harmonizations of different micro and macro level data sources. So you can use this also in order to merge policy indices into your data sets. And this technology developed there also includes Eurobarometer files. They also designed a wizard in which you could generate scripts yourself, so selecting variables from different sources and combining them. But this wizard is currently offline, so you can contact the team at the email address mentioned here if you are interested in getting such a script. So they will help you generating the script, and with this you can merge different micro and macro level data sources. And finally, you can also take a different approach. For example, you could be interested in measuring certain types of societal climate, for example, gender-based violence attitudes, and use this as an aggregate figure in other surveys. And this is made pretty easy by the aforementioned open data portal, because there you get basically aggregate results for virtually all Eurobarometer surveys. So you could use such variables, for example, also in the European Social Survey, and have this kind of data linking also based on the Eurobarometer. And finally, the colleagues of the European Commission also published selected trend Excel files. So these are longer running results, not just per wave or per year, but really long-term trends that you can readily use based on these Excel files. So this is the literature I cited if you are interested in learning more about these research questions, and for now that's it. I thank you for your attention, and I look forward to answering your questions.